Colin, considering this is the second Economics of Mutuality forum at the CBE Business School, that entire concept of economics of mutuality, where are we right now? How far have we gotten so far?
We're carrying a lot of companies along in spirit, and there's a great movement afoot in terms of recognizing that something needs to change. And we've made a little bit of progress in terms of actual implementation. And in some areas we may have actually have gone backwards rather than forwards. So it's a mixed message in terms of actually what's happening. And I'll give you an illustration. So we have now, for example, in relation to what are termed benefit companies, corporations, an increasing number of firms that are signing up to the benefit movement around the world. And that's embracing in particular a lot of small companies. But we've seen a marked resistance on the part of most large companies to follow suit. And indeed what's happened this year in relation to one of them, namely Unilever, which through Paul Poman was regarded as the prime example of a company that was operating in this space. We've seen that firm subject to a very brief hostile, potentially hostile takeover from Kraft that went away pretty much over a weekend. But even so, that takeover has had a dramatic effect in terms of the way in which Unilever is now taking its business forward. And it's a real issue as to whether or not it will be able to sustain its emphasis on being a responsible business going forward.
Well, that is a very interesting point, because economics of mutuality is something that is already against mainstream. And if nothing else, that is the target, to get this to be a concept of mainstream making business. But when the going gets tough, when you have a large company which is quoted on the stock exchange, lots of investor interest, vested interest, how hard is it really for these companies not to waver?
It depends on who their owners are. So if you look at most listed companies around the world, they in fact are not like the Unilevers or the typical large listed company in the UK. Most of them have a dominant family or other owner, a large blockholder as it's sometimes termed, even if they're listed on stock markets. So although they're listed on stock markets, they still have the protection that comes from that family or other large blockholding interest. What differentiates companies in the UK in particular, and in many cases in the United States, is that they don't have blockholders. It's very dispersed ownership, and that's where the problem comes, because in that case it's very difficult to ensure the commitment of one's investors, and in particular one's institutional investors, to those more purposeful type of objectives.
So would you say, in order to disperse the concept of mutuality, is it easier for that to start with a privately owned, family-owned businesses, with the entrepreneur, with the future leaders, perhaps startup companies, which you are crafting here at the business school?
Absolutely, there's no question. It's much easier for a Mars of this world, which is 100% family-owned, to pursue a mutuality objective than it is for a typically large listed company. Because provided you can persuade the family, then you have the backing of your owners. And likewise with an entrepreneurial startup firm, if the owner wants it to move in that direction, it can do. Now the problem arises once companies reach a size that they become publicly listed but also widely held.
Yeah, and unless the concept generally changes, how you evaluate companies as a good investor, this will always be a bit of an issue, yes, to say the least.
So the alternative is that one persuades institutions as well to change their practices. Now that's much harder, because institutions will say, well, we're ultimately responsible to our beneficiaries.
So it is the beneficiary. So it's me as a shareholder that should not hold the company I own via paper hostage to what I want, i.e. just my profits, my short-term profits.
But it's very difficult for you as a small investor in a large institution to exert any influence on what it's going to do. So everyone concludes that, well, all that can happen is that we just let this institution pursue the maximisation of profits, and that's where the problem really comes. Now, some large institutions, in particular sovereign funds, wealth funds, are taking a slightly different approach, by which they're saying we're looking to invest in responsible business, and they are so they are pursuing that as an objective. But a large number of the institutional investors have not yet shifted significantly in that way.
But there is a motion, and that is good.
There is a movement, yeah.
Thank you, Colin.